Welcome to Warrior Commission Now, where we talk about practical ways to live out our commission in the Lord. I'm Christine Caston.
And I'm Sharon Rudolph.
We want to thank you for joining us today. We are just sitting here at our tables, drinking our cuppas and enjoying just a conversation. And we actually got onto a fairly complex topic today. And so Sharon and I want to just kind of unpack it a bit. It still has its complexities, and there's not an absolute in some of the things that we'll be talking about. There are always extenuating circumstances, but essentially we want to talk about what it is to create a new era culture that focuses or lives out, would probably be a better word, grace and glory. And the glory part is, of course, the Lord's. And what happens out of that choice to have a culture that is a grace-oriented culture. Now, we're not talking about hyper grace. We're not talking about discounting or overlooking issues. What we're talking about is grace in relationships and in growth and development. So Sharon, you want to kind of kick us off with the verse that kind of got this whole thing started?
Yes, because I love the story in John 9 of the man born blind. And it starts out with the disciples defaulting to the religion of the time. And they ask, Master, whose sin is responsible for this man's condition, the blindness? Is he punished for his own sins or perhaps for his parents' sin? Why was he born blind? And I think that's a question so many of us ask. Okay, God, the why, right? And that's kind of from a victim mentality. Why did this bad thing happen, right? We have other calls about our why. And sometimes when you discover your personal why, it gives freedom and it's empowering. But when you come at the why question from a why did this happen to me, right? It doesn't necessarily reflect this looking for, okay, what's God up to? And Jesus was always focused on, okay, what's God up to? Right? So verse 3, Jesus says, his condition has absolutely nothing to do with any sins committed, either by himself or his parents. Neither him nor his parents were guilty of sin. This is an opportunity, I love that word, for God's action to be unveiled in him. And I think for anyone who's been on any kind of inner healing journey, that concept of God's in the middle of unveiling something becomes exciting. And when you're focused on why did this happen? How's it going to get fixed? And there's so much shame.
Yeah, and impatience of why hasn't it happened yet?
Yes, this is still here.
Like that, it's magic bullet.
Right. And we've learned in the Warrior Commission, haven't we, Christine, that it's all about the process.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's all about the relationship with God.
Yeah. And
I love in the story, if you get to the end of the story, the man born blind gets his sight back. And he still hasn't seen Jesus, right? He just has his sight back. And I'm still fascinated by the fact that Jesus didn't just give him sight. He did all the neural work so that when the man looked at something, he knew what it was and he had a word for it.
Right.
That takes years of development for little babies, and Jesus just did it. Anyway, so
side note.
Side note. But that man was able to stand up to the religious leaders of the day and say, I don't know what you're talking about, but I know this man came from God. The man got the point, right?
Right.
And so it's being on this journey of seeing the glory of God revealed, right?
Right.
And I believe that requires a different culture than a lot of us have grown up in or seen in the people around us. So Christine, how do you see this culture as different? Because you've done so much in the Warrior Commission to help develop and establish the culture we have of walking alongside. What's the Lord taught you about what it takes to really bring people to glory?
Yes, well, I have to say it's not just me, first of all. It's not something you can do alone,
Right.
which is the whole part of how you create a culture that is like this. But it's first of all, it starts with a choice. And it's a choice to say, okay, I'm okay if process is messy. I'm okay if along the journey things get a little out of sorts, and things aren't necessarily smooth and easy, and everyone's in status quo, because the whole idea of a status quo culture is that you have no space to actually grow. You have no space to be real. You have no space to be in that place of what we call messy. You have to have it all together, right? So it moves you into this performance-based culture. The other part of that choice is that when you say, I'm going to embrace what process is messy looks like as a leader in this culture, and other people choose to also do that, then what happens is the person walking through the process becomes more valuable than what might be perceived about that situation, and or about the person who's going through that situation. And the other part is that whenever someone is in a process is messy moment, when you gather around them, you're going to be challenged too, right? Your iron sharpens iron. You're going to be challenged in grace. You're going to be challenged in, do you unconditionally love? You're going to be challenged in what it looks like to navigate some of the things that come up in that process, both in you and in someone else. So it's kind of committing to your own place of growth as well. And so I know we kind of talked about there's two sides to this. There's the person going through it and the person or the people walking alongside that person.
Right.
But I think the main thing in our culture was we decided that instead of ostracizing someone because their process was messy, or distancing ourselves, or saying, go fix your issue and then come back, good luck with that.
Yes.
We chose to take more of a loving in the moment, present with them kind of stance, even if present with them involves a choice. And we'll talk about that, a choice to pull back, but we'll talk about that in a second. Sharon, you want to talk a little bit about, I guess let's maybe start with the extending grace idea. So let's kind of cover that and explore that just a little bit, because you've got to either extend grace or receive it in the process of that journey.
Right. And I think when you look at this story, and Jesus's focus was always on what's God up to. Mm-hmm. So whenever we're interacting with someone and we realize, okay, there's a block, there's something not quite right. Why? And we start to ask Papa, okay, what do you want me to know about this not being on the same page? Or they're obviously upset. What do you want me to know? Because that's where Jesus started. God, what do you want me to know? And
you can only do what you see your father do and say what you hear your father say, right? So it goes back into relationship immediately.
Yes. So we start out with, if you're extending grace, it's got to start with your relationship with God and this understanding of how he extends grace to us, right? Because of what Jesus did. And that empowers us to be able to see them as God sees them and see what's possible if they know they're accepted. And from a brain science place, healing doesn't, especially emotional healing, doesn't come if people are not in an emotionally safe place, right? So you give people permission to be broken. They don't have to put up a good face. They don't have to behave well, because I'm a recovering people pleaser, and I had many years of knowing how to behave well to fit in, right?
Well, behavior modification is only surface, and it can only be sustained for so long. You can only pretend to be a certain way for so long. So
So how about we extend grace, see people the way God does, start to realize our battle's not flesh and blood. That's one of those Christian trite sayings, but it's true. Your battle isn't with this person. There's an enemy, and the best way to take out that enemy is loving, and loving well.
Yeah.
Loving well. And it's fascinating to me how when you partner with Jesus to extend grace and love well, things happen, God shows up, and you do get to see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And that's worth whatever the effort is,
right?
And whatever gets poked in me in the process, because sure enough, it's always a two-way street. So when you're extending grace, there are always possibilities for upgrades, but mostly it deepens your relationship with God, which is a good place to be.
Right, exactly. And that's, I think that's part of when you're extending grace, you're learning how to love unconditionally. And that's what God is really teaching us, right? Perfect love casts out all fear. We it's a key verse, and it's part of our journey with the Lord of how do you love in perfect love? How do you love, not imperfect, but in a place of perfect love? How do you love? How do you love well? And so in that place, you respect where the person is, you respect their choices, you give an invitation for the walking alongside. And sometimes the walking alongside is praying for that person as they want to step into a place of reflection, or they're wrestling with themselves. Because a lot of times when you're in a place of growth and things get exposed, you realize there's something that's not right, but you aren't quite sure how to put your finger on it. And sometimes you just need that time to really assess and think through it.
Yes.
And so being one who's extending grace is also learning through what the Lord is prompting in you of where you're standing and positioning around that person. Are you next to them? Are you on a prayer wall for them? Are you walking alongside them? And it's so much of it is based on where they are in that process and what they need in that movement forward. So there's also another side, though. There's the person going through it.
Yeah.
And we've both been in that place where we were growing grace in other people's lives. But so tell me, Sharon, a little bit about the person who is receiving the grace and the choices that person is making to receive the grace in that place. Because a lot of times when someone comes alongside of you and you're in that place of that messy is coming out, sometimes you can lash out. And sometimes you can be like, no, I don't want to change. I don't want this. And so let's talk through kind of that power of choice in receiving.
Well, I think for the individual who is in their own messy, so oftentimes we can't see it. You have a normal that you've lived so much of your life. And the Lord is saying, I have something on hand here for you that looks totally different. It takes a great deal of courage to walk, even if you're messy or the old is painful or not fun. People will, C.S. Lewis in one of his books talked about how children in the city would rather play in their mud puddle than leave the mud puddle and go to the beach, because they'd never been to the beach and they hadn't seen it. So they love their mud puddle, right? I'm having fun here. And so often in our walk with God, he knows this amazing, better place he has for us, but it's hard to leave what we know to step into that. So the person who's having grace extended to them has to get to the point where they're willing to say, okay, I'm willing to take a risk. And so often it takes the walking alongside. And I think historically, we will send people, go find a counselor, you go find someone to fix you. And then when you're all better, come back, right? But what the Lord's been teaching us in the Warrior Commission is there's something about walking alongside people. So yes, they may need the counselor, but it's having a safe place to learn to practice.
Right.
It's having a safe place to learn to be who you are in Jesus, apart from the old defaults.
Right.
So it's a risk and it takes courage. And that is a choice that individual has to take to move forward. It's the beginning place. And once you get there, once you make the choice, okay, I'm going to risk and find out what this thing is God has for me, then all the dominoes start to fall into place. And it's never as hard as you think it's going to be. and when you get to the other side, oh, that is seeing the goodness of God in the land of the living. That's when the glory comes out.
And that's when you step into a new place of freedom. And freedom is always a glorious experience. You know, there's joy, there's excitement, there's wonder. You know, a lot of things get restored back to you that you feel like you may have lost in that process of the tension, but they've never been gone. God's just been holding them, you know, in his hand for not to withhold, but to treasure and to keep precious in his hand, knowing that it's for your life and it's something that's going to enrich you as you move through that process. But I think the thing about the idea of the new era culture is that if you want a truly relational culture, you have to, as a leader, you have to make a commitment to the people. And the people have to be the goal, if you will, not the means to the goal. So the mission statement isn't about the vast world that you may be able to go into. And that may be part of the mission, right? That may be part of the call, is that it will impact globally. And that's fantastic. But if you're focused on the global impact and not on the people in your space,
Amen,
then you're going to miss what it is to make a global impact, because you can't make a global impact on your own. It takes all of us to make a global impact for the kingdom, you know, to as Jesus said, spread God's glory to the ends of the earth, right? But part of this glory being spread has to do with what we carry and what we know and what we've experienced in our own personal growth process. So if we've experienced growth in a culture that walks alongside and gathers with you, then you recognize what it is to have a healthy community and a healthy place to, and a safe place to really address your development and your maturing as a son or daughter of God.
So we've gone kind of long today. And so I just want to encourage you that if you want to be a part of this extending grace, if you want to be a part of seeing the goodness of God, because the goodness and the glory go together, the goodness of God in the land of the living, it is about new era culture and doing something as the body of Christ that we haven't always done greatly. So in the Warrior Commission, we are practicing. We don't have all the answers. We haven't figured it all out, but we are willing to risk and practice and love people. So you could come check out the warriorcommission.com. That's our website, and take a look at what might be possible for you to be able to. Oh, wow. I'm just seeing. Sorry, Christine. This is one of those. Okay, Papa, the Lord. The Lord just has something so different for us than we've walked out before. Mm-hmm. And in the Warrior Commission, we are committed to walking it out together. Mm-hmm. So y'all might enjoy that. Come check us out.
Have a great day.